Hi, it's Dennis Daly. I recently found a major interview in my archives that I didn't do. During the time I was at UPI Radio, one of our weekly programs was UPI Roundtable, and my colleague Ron Amadon was chosen to interview none other than Milton Berle.
Our guest this week on UPI Roundtable, Mr. Milton Berle, Mr. Vaudeville, Mr. Television, Mr. Show Business, and now...
Missed the boat.
And now, Mr. Author.
Right.
The author of a new book. It is called B.S. I Love You, published by McGraw-Hill, and it deals with the show business greats that you have met over the years that you have brought to the Friars Club. For you, this seems like a real basic question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. For those who are not familiar with the Friars Club, tell us a little bit about it.
Well, the Friars Club originally started in the East. That's the mother club. Started by a lot of press agents and show business names and big people like George M. Cohan. But that was back in 1908. And it became a fraternal organization, a men's club only, of course, and where they could drink and have fun and tell spicy or dirty jokes to each other. No women allowed, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Today it might be different, but it will be different with the mandatory rules. And it started back in 1908, and it's a fraternal organization, which also is a foundation for beneficial humanitarian causes. We give out a lot of money when we put on shows and specials and everything.
I'd say it would appear from the book that the operative phrase at the Friars Club is, if you can't say anything good about someone, well, say it anyway.
Don't even bother to talk. Well, you were talking about Round Table before. Didn't you mention Round Table?
Yes, that's the name of our show.
It is. That's strange because this action of the whole book takes place at the Round Table at the both Friars, the one in the East and the one in the West, which I originally started out in the East. I was president there for 18 years. Now I'm president of the one in California for about 15. And the Round Table discussion, Ron Table, is that all right? Can I say Ron
Certainly.
Table? Make a joke, okay? And laugh it up. I laugh when you speak. And at the Round Table, the thing that I have in the book, which is called B.S. I Love You, and the B.S. does not stand for Barbara Streisand or Barbara Stanwyck. It stands for what just it is. And you know where the title came from? From Lyndon B. Johnson. When Lyndon Johnson was a congressman, I invited him to the Friars Club in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he became he had a lot of fun. We put him on, clowned around, and put him down, and threw lines at him, all in fun. And then when he became president, I invited him again in California to come to the Friars, which is practically the same thing. It's throwing lines at each other at the Round Table. And he said, well, I want to thank you, Milton, for inviting me there, but I don't think I can make it because we're all with security officers and everything. And besides, we have a lot of BS that goes on here at the club, more in Washington than you have here at the club. So that gave me the idea for the title, B.S. I Love You. And I want to just correct you for a minute, Ron, if I may. It's not your program. I mean, it's not my program, but it will be. And I would like to say that this is not just a theatrical story. It's not just about it takes place in the theatrical club, but it's 60 funny years, which is the subtitle, with the famous and the infamous, those that were not members of the club but were invited, such as, ready for the names, Huey Long, Al Capone, Oni Madden, Big Frenchie, and people that, some tales that can be told and said at the table, I put in the book.
Mm-hmm. Al Capone sat anywhere he wanted to.
Oh! It's like the guy that walked in from Chicago once and said to me, you know, my brother slapped Al Capone in the face. I said, really? I'd like to meet your brother. And he said, we're not going to dig him up just for you. So that's the kind of and we had all kinds of infamous people there. Yeah. And then, of course, we had greats like Orson Welles and everything. Mm-hmm. And I think it was Fred Allen who said at the Friars Club, when Orson Welles was leaving one night, he said, one afternoon, from the Round Table, he said, as Orson was leaving, he said, there, but for the grace of God, goes God. So these actually, Ron, are not made up written jokes. These are really truisms and anecdotes that were said by the people that I credit them to in the book. And I think, well, I should say, I think I wrote the book. Did you read it?
Yes.
Now this is just, put this right down in purple now. Did you like it?
Yes, very much.
That's all
I learned a lot out of it.
You learned a lot? Yeah, I tell you what it does.
The lives of people sort of backstage.
That's right.
You might not have seen at the footlights.
Well, that's right. Will Rogers and some of the great Sophie Tucker and Capone and songwriters. Of course, there's one great... We had different types of guys that belonged to the club. One great story. I don't know if you read it, or you read it, but I don't know if you remember it. We had a songwriters group that belonged to the club, big songwriters. And Harry Warren, who was really one of the great songwriters, he wrote 42nd Street and Lullaby of Broadway. He was on the outs with Irving Berlin, who is still, he's about to become 100 pretty soon. And Harry Warren was on the outs. So he said at the table during World War II, he said, they bombed the wrong Berlin. Now, that's the kind of... Then we had Harry Woods, who wrote When the Moon Comes Over the Mountain and Red, Red Robin. We had a little pub and a bar next to the Friars Club on 48th Street, and he went in there with Hoagie Carmichael, who wrote Stardust, and they had a beer, or at least he thought he was going to have a beer, but he drank pretty good, Harry Woods. And during World War I, he had his hand shot off, and he only had a stump of a left arm. Well, that stump actually, Ron, became like a club. I mean, if he hit you with it, he'd kill you. So he was in this bar, and he got into an argument with somebody at the bar. They started a fight, and he took his left arm, which was like a club, and batted this guy. He bruised him. He nearly killed him, hit him on the head and blood all over. And somebody walked over to Hoagie Carmichael and said, who is that fellow that's doing that? And Hoagie Carmichael said, that's Harry Woods. He wrote Try a Little Tenderness.
Now, you have a great affection for the Friars Club, and that comes through page after page in the book. But when Milton Berle went to the Friars Club for the very first time, you were one awestruck young man, if I read what you're saying in the book correctly.
Well, the first time, Ron, that I was taken into the Friars Club, I was only 12 years old. So, right? So, Eddie Cantor, who maybe folks that are listening in don't remember Eddie Cantor, some of them do, but he was a very big star.
They should.
And I used to do an imitation of Eddie Cantor. Not only me, lots of people, lots of guys. And he sort of took a liking to me. And he said to my mother, he said, your son, 12 years old, is kind of flippant, meaning me, throwing those one-liners around. We didn't call them one-liners at that time. He said, I'd like to have him mix with the big boys. And my mother said, well, what do you mean by big boys? I'd like to take him over to the Friars on 48th Street and see how funny he is. See if he can get a little training and a little put down himself. So, found a pair of long pants, which you read in the book, how I got the long pants, which we won't say in the air. Well, we'll skip that. And that's for private reading. And I put the long pants on, and I went into the Friars Club, and, well, I was doing 1920. And I sat at the big table there, at the round table, and at the table was, H.L. Mencken, George Kaufman, Morse Hart, George M. Cohan, all the...
Just a few names.
Just a few names.
Just a few names.
But they were flipped. They were sharp. The witticisms, the lines that they threw. And that's the first time that I ever come into the Friars Club. Then some years later, I joined the Friars Club when I was about 19, 7 years later. And so that was about 1921. Right?
You had an opportunity to meet some of the greatest people in the show business industry over the years at this club, and to mix with them and get to know them personally.
Yes, I did, and what you just said prior is that there are a lot of secrets that are in this book that you can't tell the book by the cover, that about the personalities, some private little things.
Are these people going to be talking to you after they read this book?
No, I didn't put them down. I just told the truth.
That's true.
About Errol Flynn and all that stuff.
Yeah. Let's talk about a couple of these men that you named. Perhaps starting, since you were in Washington for this interview, the man at the top, Ronald Reagan. He appeared there.
Oh, Ronald Reagan. He was a charter member of the Friars of California. He was a charter member. And it's very funny, my photograph is up, a painting as the president of the club. So when Ronald Reagan became president of the United States, they took down my picture and they put up Ronald Reagan's picture. And I didn't get mad at it because I thought he deserved it. I know Ronald very well, and I knew, Mrs. Reagan, Nancy Davis Reagan, and I used to, back in the 30s, when he was in motion pictures and in Bonzo and all that stuff, I wonder if he looks at them now, how he feels. Ronnie, are you listening? Oh, you're busy now. You just signed the treaty. Thank goodness that you signed the treaty. And I heard, I don't know if this is true, I wasn't invited to the dinner last night, Ronnie.
You should have.
This Ron I'm talking.
Oh,
I'm talking.
Ron.
I can say Ronnie Reagan.
But
I heard that Gorbachev sang with Van Cliburn. He was singing. I hear they're going to do an act now together. They're going to open in Vegas. They're singing "Oh How I Miss You Tonight" or something like that. It's a joke, folks. Laugh it up, please. Laugh it up.
Eddie Cantor, you mentioned for the first time.
Right.
How did you meet him?
Well,
he's a big star.
Yeah, well, Eddie Cantor was in the Ziegfeld Follies. Then right after that, he did a show called Kid Boots. Then another show called Make It Snappy, and which are very corny titles now, but they weren't then. And he was the talk. He was the rage. And we all, us young kids, used to do an imitation of him, an impression of him. Not as good as he did. And he saw me one night doing an imitation of him. And he said, "That's the best imitation of me that I've ever seen." So maybe that's what took a liking to me for, because I did it pretty good. And his wife, Ida, was a very good friend of my mother's. They became very good friends, my mother, Sandra. And that's how we got together.
Much like the Marx Brothers. Your mother was, much like the Marx Brothers, your mother was a very pivotal force in getting you into show business.
Oh, like Minnie? Like Minnie Marx? Yes. She was... this is not said very often, but I was saying for your show here. My mother was with the New York Police Department. She was one of the first policewomen. She was a detective, private detective, and a store detective. She used to work at Wanamaker's and Gimbel's and Saks, but she managed to get a very easy job trying to find shoplifters. She always managed to get put in the piano department.
I see.
Unless you can steal a piano.
That's tough to do.
But my mother was a driving force, Ron, for my career. And
how so? How did it work out the first time that you stood up on stage and started show business?
Well, it worked out this way. Back in 1913, Charlie Chaplin was the rage in 14, right? Silent Days. And one Halloween day, I dressed up as Charlie Chaplin. I walked around with my father's long pants and his derby or something, and tore up my mother's fur muff that she had. I put some mucilage on and made a mustache out of it. And I was being followed, and I was doing shtick, what we call it, mime and reactions and facial things. And somebody followed me back to the house in a big crowd, and my mother said, "What's going on here?" And I remember the man's name was Larry Eldridge. This is 1913. And he said, "This boy does a wonderful impression of Eddie Cantor. We're running an Eddie Cantor contest in Mount Vernon, New York. Would you like to enter him into the contest?" My mother said, "Oh, well, of course, of course." You see, when my mother was young, she wanted to go on the stage. She wanted to be an actress. But in those days, the parents thought that anyone who was being an actress would be a harlot or a woman of the streets. But so she poured all her energies into me. So she pushed me and pushed me. She was a real wonderful woman, loved it terribly, but she was a stage mother. And she made Gypsy Rose Lee's mother look like Mary Poppins. And of course she was a policewoman, and she dared anybody. And Mom traveled around with me all the time, pushing me and pushing me and pushing me. And then I became a boy model. She got me a job as a boy model for Buster Brown shoes. Isn't that lovely? And I have a picture in the book. Did you see the Buster Brown collar? And with the dog tag. And since then, there were thousands of them. And then I played in vaudeville. And my mother, to the day she passed away, was always in the audience. every show.
Every show.
As a one-woman claque. She would laugh, even when the audience weren't laughing. She laughed. She laughed at the questions, you know what I mean? Which reminded me, I said, one night, I got 10 laughs in a row, and they were all in a row my mother was in. And she was my one-woman claque. And she was also the biggest observer and critique of myself. She, if a joke didn't go over, she said, you got to take that joke out and replace it and weed it out. So we'd have to stay on the road a long time. We played small towns, towns you never heard of, towns where the local hooker was a virgin, you know. Or Howard Johnson only had one flavor. That's how big the towns were. And Mother traveled with me all around. And now you're going to say, what happened to my family? Now I had 3 others in the family, 4 others. And my father stayed home. So it was a reversal with me. My mother traveled with me, my father stayed home and did the cooking and everything. And she gave her whole life to me. And I think I gave most of mine to her.
Wonderful training ground that's no longer out there in America, though, for rising young stars.
Well, as you look at the young comics that are coming up today, who they may be, Robin Williams, Jay Leno, all those boys, unfortunately, they did not have the training grounds, as you said, or find out the real expertise of flopping. In other words, if you played Carbondale, Pennsylvania, or Keokuk, and a joke bombed, it bombed, baby, it bombed. Just like early television, when I was on in 1948 for the first time, it was a live show. Some of them were dead, but it was a live show. And we didn't have the laugh machine that they put in the sitcoms, which bugged me. And we did not have cue cards. We did not have teleprompters. And everything was improv. And we didn't have a chance to rehearse. We just talked it over and went on and did it, like with Martin and Lewis and Presley and Bob Hope and Sinatra and myself. So you got what you saw, and you saw what you got in those days. You didn't get a second chance in early television. If a joke bombed, it bombed, as I said, and you couldn't take it over. What was seen that night was seen that night. You could have got embarrassed. And you talk about bloopers. They have shows today on the air called bloopers. Well, I have a show coming out, a special that I did. Not that you asked me, but I thought I'd get it in before we sign off.
Coming up in January.
It's coming up in the month of January. It's called, my name, The Second Time Around. Now, we had kinescope. Now, kinescope is not like tape. And you could not rerun kinescope. So this is the first run after 40 years of these shows. And in the show, this special, is the debut of Elvis Presley, debut of Martin and Lewis, Bob Hope, Frank Sinatra, Phil Silvers, Johnny Palaio and the Harmonica Rascals, and the gentleman who you were just talking about, who we owe a debt of gratitude yesterday, our beloved President, Ronald Reagan. He was an actor at the time, and he was a very good actor, too, by the way, very good. And, in fact, I was in one picture with him, and I had the most important part in the picture with Reagan, because at the beginning of the picture, I opened the door and I let Ronnie in. And it's the most important part in the picture, because if I don't open the door, he's not in the picture.
In the picture, that's right.
And then we have Carmen Miranda, Cesar Romero, Jack Benny, Red Skelton, Martha Ray, all in 1 hour. And it's wall-to-wall comedy, and I hope that the people listen in. Now, about the book. I'm not going to do that old joke. It's in his 14th printing. The first 13 were blurred. I'm not going to do that joke. But it's now in the 3rd printing, and it's only out 2 weeks.
Fantastic.
So it's selling very fast. And there's a lot of wonderful quotes in there from George Burns, who read the book, and he wrote the foreword to the book.
He wrote a very fabulous foreword.
Very funny, very funny. And the way he speaks, he wrote the way he speaks. And incidentally, I said to him, when was the last time that you had sex? He said, the last time I had sex is when I got frisked going through an airport. And then, of course, Sidney Sheldon, the great novelist, he was practically responsible for this book, because I told him about all these ideas that I had, and he said, why don't you write up some pages? So I always believed to go to the man with the most expertise and a great writer. So I wrote 160 pages, and I brought it over to Sidney Shelley and said, this is very good. It's different, it's fresh, it's new, and I think the people would like it, the public. So finish the book. So I finished the book, and here it is. B.S. I Love You.
B.S. I Love You, 60 Funny Years with the Famous and Infamous. It's published by McGraw-Hill.
Welcome back. This is Milton Amadon for UPI, and I'd like you to meet the one and only Ron Berle. You're on.
Thank you very much.
You're a good laugher. I want you to sit out in the audience when I laugh.
I'll do that. I'd love to. Tell us a little bit more.
That man there with the beard.
Our engineer.
Why do you hear make up another commandment? What were you saying?
He's very bearded. Early on in television, what was it like back in those days, especially your first show? This is a brand new medium, something that really had never been done to the scope that you did it before. You were a real pioneer in those days.
Well, in those days, as I said, we didn't know what television was going to be like. Who knew? Who figured that an astronaut would hit a golf ball off the moon? Mm-hmm. No. I was on, in 1947, on radio for Texaco. And then in the latter part of 47, they said they'd like to go on television, to be the first ones to do a show. And they said, Milton, have you got an idea? And I said, well, the only idea that I have is what I've been doing for years. That's the only way to write a book, know something that you're going to write about. Mm-hmm. And that's vaudeville and nightclubs. I said, so let's do a vaudeville show, a variety show. And if I were to tell you, Ron, I don't know if you'd believe it or your listeners would believe it, but there was no money around those days. We didn't know how much it was going to cost. Now, don't forget, we had 6 to 8 acts with stars in it, and we did 39 shows a year, live. And you wouldn't believe what the show cost per show a year, not a week. Mm-hmm. How much you think?
Well, the amounts are so astronomical these
days.
It's hard to judge.
Are you ready? Those that are in the financial world, I'll talk about above and below the line, including actors, scenery, costumes, and also time from NBC. Mm-hmm. $15,000 for the whole show.
Oh, my.
Now, today, you couldn't get Patty Page to go... You couldn't have it do for $15,000, or Diana Ross would say, that's $20,000.
Yeah. Super Bowl spot now, $63,000.
I know.
They're just selling $66,000 for a spot.
And more than that, I'll tell you more. I just did a commercial just now. Did you see it yet? No, you didn't see it. Are your head shaking? I hear something rattle.
That one whizzed by me there somewhere.
No, I did a commercial just now. It's on. It's for BVDs. Mm-hmm. It's not a joke. It's a joke when I'm on. And it's unbelievable, the economics and the risings of the salaries, and you don't think we had a studio like you have here with all this gorgeous glamour here, and with the air breathing in here. Every half hour the engineer comes in and blows in your ear.
That's a nice guy.
That's the air.
He's a nice man.
I know he is, and you better clear my voice up, please. And pardon me for coughing, ladies and gentlemen, but I have to. Anyway, those days, back in 1948, which is next year, please the Lord, will be 40 years that I'm in television, we had tough times. As I look back at it now and see the facilities today, which are amazing, the things that they do today. Now you have the isolated camera, which I have to take a bow on, Ron. I created that, and I made that up. I invented the isolated camera. We didn't call it an ISO, we called it a slave. That's when tape came in 1954. We had no way to edit the tape unless you'd make it a jump cut. So we had what we call a slave camera on one person. So we would cut to the other person when we wanted to make an edit. And now they have, we'd say, well, I must have 15 isolated cameras on a football game now.
Sure.
Because you see every play. Now, the slow-mo, I had nothing to do with. Then I had something to do with something else. Not that you asked me, but while I'm on, I'm going to tell you. Because you're never going to get me again at this kind of money. And that is that when you see a television show or a news program, could be Dan Rather, could be Cronkite, could be Brinkley, could be anybody, or Nightline, anything. As they look into the lens And that teleprompter that rolls in front of the lens, I created that with the mirror that does the reflection. So I do get paid from the TP, from teleprompter, and I do get paid for the isolated camera. Not a lot of money, but maybe $1,000 a minute. But anyway, no, nothing like that. So I just handed a little step to television.
Yeah. You set new standards for millions of comedians, though, especially in the early days. It seems there almost wouldn't do for a laugh on stage. But you set the standards that millions and zillions of comedians down through the years have followed, and your early TV days especially. When it all took off, how did you feel?
Well, I didn't know at that time, no one knew, as I told you, how it would take off that big, right? And in the first 3 weeks, pow, it went way up, and you wouldn't believe what the Nielsen rating was.
What was it? How high?
You ready? 83.7.
Whoa!
Of course, there were only 83 sets.
Well, that's 100%, though,
no.
right?
And
you outlasted a lot of shows.
Over
those years.
Yes. Well, I did 6 years with Texaco. Then I went on for Buick. Then I went on other shows. But then in came tape, and playing. I'd rather play to not that you ask me these questions, but these possibly would be questions you ask me. I like to play more to a live audience than to film a show or do a half-hour sitcom, because it's stop and go, and it becomes dusty the third time you do. It's like making pictures. I just finished a picture, or vice versa. It might have finished me, with Sid Caesar and Danny Thomas and yours truly, which will be out in March. It's a CBS movie of the week. It's called Side by Side, and very difficult to make, because the director didn't like the take, or the actor didn't like it. Can I take it over? Well, the spontaneity is gone about the. You know who holds the record for many, many takes? These are all, I'm letting you in on a little vamos here. You know who? Marlon Brando.
Really?
Marlon Brando. 193 takes in one picture of the same scene. And what do you think was printed?
The first one.
Take two.
Take two.
Before William Wyler, the great director, died, he did Best Years of Our Lives. He was one of the great directors. He was a friar, and I was sitting at the round table with him, and he had just finished directing Barbra Streisand in Funny Girl. And I said to him, it's gotten around the grapevine, Willie, that he had a problem with Barbra Streisand. And he said, no, Milton, but you can't blame her. It's the first picture she ever directed. I'll wait on that. But that's the difference between live and... so when I play a nightclub, and I play Las Vegas, or I play Atlantic City, or wherever it may be, or in a theater, down here in Washington, someplace, the National, something, I'd rather have that contact with an audience. The spontaneity keeps happening.
That instant gratification, almost.
Absolutely. Like this.
Yeah.
So this is ad-lib. So please put those papers away. Okay.
Is there one comedian that cracks you up among all the others that has over the years or currently does?
Well, they're not around anymore. But where I learned my schooling was from, maybe possibly you remember, you were only a child. How old are you?
Now 44.
I got underwear older than you. And that cracked me up. I had a very big favorite. He later the Three Stooges started to work for him. It's called Ted Healy. Ted Healy. It was a great comic, and I sort of emulated him, and he didn't mind it either. He was kind of flattered. And there was another funny man called Willie Howard. Now, he worked with his brother Eugene Howard, who looked like a piece of stone, but it didn't make any difference. And he was funny. Now, we have some funny people today. We have the newcomers that are coming up today, and I think they're very wonderful. Some of them are not. Some of them should be in another business. But unfortunately, Ron, I don't know if I should say this, you see, the schooling that a Jack Benny had, or a Hope, or a George Burns, or a Gleason, or a Skelton, or yours truly had, that will never be again, of weeding out stuff and getting the experience, the expertise of working in front of different types of audiences. You have some very clever guys today. But there's one thing bugs me, if I'm allowed to say it on your show. It's not suggestive, it's not obscene. It's partly obscene, but it's not on my part. Being that we see cable shows today, and cable, as you know, and maybe your listeners know, cable shows are not under the supervision of the FCC.
Right.
So it's not like public television. So they're free to say whatever they wish. I don't go for that. When I see somebody do a stand-up, I'll mention their names. I think they're so talented that they don't need the obscenities and the four-letter words, and they don't need to be dirty. I think they do it just to get their own kicks, to see and shock an audience. And I'm talking about Robin Williams, and I'm talking about, well, Billy Crystal doesn't. He's one of the funny men. And then you have Richard Pryor, and you have now Eddie Murphy. And I hope he's listening. I don't care where he is. But Eddie Murphy is a great comedian when he's playing a part in a picture like Beverly Hills Cop. But when he does a stand-up, he gets kind of rough. And somebody asked him, well, not me, somebody asked him, why, he was being interviewed, why do you use those four-letter words, obscenities? He's because that's me. Well, that's not being an actor, that's me. If that's him, he should not do that. But if he wants to do it, but hey, we're not going to tell the young boys and gals and young how to work today. But we had censorship, boy, on television, I'll tell you that. We couldn't say hell, couldn't say damn. In fact, I recall one time I was doing my opening monologue, and I said I just flew in from LaGuardia Airport on a helicopter. Then I leered at the audience, and I winked at them, meaning I couldn't say it. Then I said I just come back from Nevada, where I visited Hoover Darn. And I said, I'm not allowed to say the other word. That's what I used to say to the audience. Yeah. But today you can do what you want. You can say what you want. I'm not one I do not believe in censorship, but I do believe in the morals of guys that do not need those extracurricular words of obscenities and to help them be funny. Either they're funny or not.
Yeah.
Woody Allen never used that, did he? He's
true.
Pretty funny.
Very funny, man. I'd like to remind you of a piece that you did. As you look back over a long and wonderful career, you brightened the lives of billions, and I mean that sincerely, billions of people worldwide. And a lot of people might say, what keeps you going in show business? And you summed that up yourself, I thought, very, very well. And I only saw this recently. It was a rerun of a program of The Muppet Show, of all things. But I bring that up for this. You did a very sincere and a very moving piece on that show, and it was doing the words with a piano solo to the entertainer.
Absolutely.
And what keeps the vaudevillians, the Milton Berles, the George Burns, the real pros of this business going, I thought was summed up magnificently in that song.
Well, let me explain that. You see, we have a lot of comics around today, but we do not have a lot of comedians. Now, you're staring at me, and you must know, what the heck does he mean by that? Well, Ed Wynn, one of the greatest comedians we had, summed it up. Somebody said, what is the difference between a comic and a comedian? And Ed Wynn said, a comic is a guy who says funny things, and a comedian is a guy who says things funny. Now, that's kind of deep, but that's quite true. My idea of a comedian is one who's not afraid of silence, right? Mm-hmm. Like when Henny Youngman does his act. He's a comedian because the audience, they don't laugh, so it's very silent. No, I'm meaning when you say that what you saw in the Muppet Show, I am... here we go, talk about I don't know who else is on the show. It's only me, anyway. I can be a comic and do the one-liners. It's a lovely suit. Who shines it for you? Must be people out there I hear breathing. Did you come in here for entertainment or revenge? Like I said to you, wonderful engineer. Make up another one-liners. I can do that, but I can also play a straight part. Now, let's take let's take Walter Matthau. Let's take Jack Lemmon. Let's take Marlon Brando, who was in Sayonara, and I never heard an audience laugh so much at Sayonara because he played it out of character. Now, if you don't, you've got to get in character. So when Eddie Murphy said, "I am playing me," that's not really an actor. So when you succinctly said about me doing something on a Muppet Show and dropping it way down to a dramatic and a sincere playing of it, primarily that is an actor who does comedy and a comedian who does something straight. And there are very few around. Jackie Gleason was one of the great ones. Phil Silvers was one of the great ones. Mickey Rooney is one of the great ones. Right? Jack Benny, George Burns, you can name. But today there are a few. There's Bill Murray. There's Dan Aykroyd. There's Steve Martin, who, when he goes for a laugh, does it very seriously, and they don't laugh. But I'm kidding.
I guess what I meant too is it also, to a circus performer, that song summed up very well. A circus performer would
I knew your father.
Sawdust.
I knew your father. Your father was a sawdust man. Is that right, Amadon, your father?
That's right.
He was a clown. I remember.
He was that too.
Yeah.
But it summed up very well. The circus performer would call it the sawdust in the veins. Why do you go out there every day? Why do you keep doing what you're doing? Because it's the applause, it's the lights, it's the thing you love doing the most.
That's very true, Ron. Some comedian said, well, I said to him, why do you do that? He said, because I have talent in my veins. I said, don't you wish you had blood in your veins? That was a joke. But I do it because I know of nothing else. Somebody said to George Burns some years, he's going to be 92, bless him. Somebody said, George, when are you going to retire? And George said, to what? That sums up what you're saying. When you start in show business at 5 years old and you know of nothing else, it's in your veins. When I walk out on stage, I can have a tummy ache, a headache, a sore throat, but the minute that the spotlight hits me and I hear that first laugh, I'm in another world. So George Burns summed it up by saying, where else but in show business can you get this kind of money and take a bow? And that's the same with me.
Absolutely. Our guest on UPI Roundtable has been Milton Berle. What's ahead? You've got the special coming up in January. You've got the book out, I should say again, B.S.
Yes,
I Love You.
I Love You. It's gone wildfire.
It's going
good. Thank goodness. And in March, I'm doing a motion picture. I did it already. CBS Movie of the Week with Sid Caesar and Danny Thomas. It's called Side by Side. And it's a comedy with serious overtones. And it's about an important subject matter. We're funny in it. We get laughs, but that isn't the point of view of the picture. It's about the elderly. It's about being mandatory, the mandatory rule that comes in that you have to quit when you're 65. And we're too stalwart. They want to replace us, and we find a way that they don't replace us.
I see.
And we fight the system.
Terrific.
And I think it's a good idea, and it should be. Ronnie, I'm very glad to meet you, and I'm very glad to speak to you.
Thank you for coming by.
I love these 3 days with you. They were just wonderful. Or it seemed like it. No, it didn't. It was really wonderful.
And it's a pleasure having you on our show, believe me. Something I'll always remember. Thank you for coming by.
God bless you, and to the many, many, it might be a belated one, but I wish you a very, very healthy, Happy New Year. Happy 88. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Everyone was really thrilled to have Milton Berle in our studios that day, and I was happy Ron Amadon got to do the interview, even though I wanted to. I'm Dennis Daly.